Hi, I'm Khalil Cumberbatch, Associate Vice President of Policy at the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal justice system from various perspectives, including from those most impacted by the criminal justice system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and highlight the efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that it is affected by. We ask you, the viewer, to spread the word about Both Sides of the Bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at The Fortune Society. My guest today is Marlon Peterson, writer, host of the Decarcerated Podcast, and principal of the Presidential Group. As the conversation unfolds, please let us know your thoughts by tweeting at us at Khalil Cumberbatch and at _Marlon Peterson. Today's show is entitled Taking Away from Taking a Knee. A little more than a year ago, Colin Kaepernick became one of the most polarizing figures in the U.S. sports when he took a knee during the national anthem. It was a unique and jarring form of protest against police brutality towards African Americans. Kaepernick began his protest by sitting on the bench during the national anthem prior to a preseason game on August 14, 2016, when he was playing for the San Francisco 49ers. He was not in uniform at the time. The protest began garnering coverage when journalist Jennifer Lee Chan captured him sitting, this time in uniform, in a photograph prior to the team's third preseason game on August 26, 2016. After receiving a published open letter and speaking with Green Beret and NFL player Nate Boyer, he was convinced to take a knee rather than sit during the national anthem. From then, he has consistently taken a knee during the anthem before each game. This gesture is an acknowledgement of the vulnerability of humanity. Taking a knee in that context is a gesture of self-surrender before the greater reality of human suffering. So first, Marlon, thank you for being my guest.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you. This is my first show. I'm honored to have you as my guest. And prior to us starting, we talked about today being the 3-year anniversary of my release from immigration detention because of your work and the work of many others. So I wanted to publicly say thank you.
Of course.
And how apropos is it for us to be having this conversation today?
You're welcome, man. I'm happy that I get to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. So Marlon, what were your initial reactions when you heard about Colin Kaepernick and his protest?
I was like, it's about time. I mean, I think to have somebody who's an NFL player with that platform and prestige, he went to the Super Bowl, I think, or close to the Super Bowl, and take a stand, and not only take a stand, but that he was connected to the issues of what were happening in the community in terms of police violence. I was happy that somebody was able to do that, and somebody who's in the prime of their career, and was doing it. Initially, he wasn't doing it for all the public, for the public to see. He was just doing his own private protest, but it mattered to him, and I think that mattered more than anything. He wasn't doing it just for show.
Mm-hmm. And so, do you think that him taking a knee was something that was long overdue, or do you think that it was done at a time where the nation was still reeling from the outcome of Freddie Gray's case, as well as other cases across the country?
Well, as I said, I think it's sad that in this country, any time to make a stand against police violence against Black and brown bodies is always the right time because it's always happening. And it's been happening for decades. It's been happening before Kaepernick was on this planet, before you and I were on this planet. So I think at the time, there's always the appropriate time for it. And I think particularly, he did it last year in 2016, it was in the midst of a very divisive election period, but it was also coming out of, just a couple, year out of, the Ferguson, and as you mentioned, Baltimore. Sandra Bland was still very much in everybody's memory. So, it was the right time, but it was always the right time to do these sort of things. I think Kaepernick, his gesture was a signal to those who were watching football, and that is the masses of America, particularly those in Middle America. We call them the flyover states. To say that, well, you can support me in our ability to play sports, entertain you, but don't think that just because we're here to entertain you, that we don't have a real concern for what's happening in our communities.
And Kaepernick is one of many sports figures who utilize his platform. And some people have compared him to the likes of Muhammad Ali and So for you, who, if you could hold his example up to someone who has used their platform in the past, particularly in the sports arena, who would you relate him to and why?
Well, I think Ali's a perfect for him in terms of he refused to, go into the war to enlist in the military at a time when he was also at the peak of the prime of his career, and he wasn't just like ducking out the military. He had a real reason for why he was doing this. Like, we can't go over to kill people in Vietnam if we're not taking care of our own black and brown folks here. If I'm getting discriminated against here in Harlem, why am I going over there to fight for this country? He understood the impact of his words, but the impact of that moment, and that on a public stage, to push America to be honest with itself. Mm-hmm. And I think, so when I think about Kaepernick, his other thing about it is that Ali wasn't loved at that time. He was considered unpatriotic. He was receiving death threats. He went to jail, right? They stripped him of his belt and took away his license to box. So in the same way they blackball Ali, they're blackballing Kaepernick because he still doesn't have a job to today, and he's still one of the better quarterbacks out there.
So what do you think is next for Kaepernick? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts about his blackballing being one of the major barriers that stops him from continuing to utilize the platform that he had access to last year. So what do you think is next for him?
I mean, I think he's trying to figure it out himself. But what I do know he's doing, just yesterday or 2 days ago, he was in Harlem with some young folks and donated a couple $1,000s to the program out there. And I know he's donated suits to people who are formerly incarcerated. So I mean, I think he's growing into himself, and he's growing into understanding that that moment is beyond just one moment, and that there's a greater purpose for him. I think he's becoming to reckon with the fact that the NFL don't want him back in there, and that there's a greater purpose for him. And his greater purpose is important because it's an awakening once again. Because as we see now, it's upsetting the owners, right? And the maniacal president can't keep him out of his tongue. Other people are taking a stand because of him. You see Jamil Hill with ESPN, who is now suspended for 2 weeks. Like, he's inspiring other people who have platforms to take a stand. LeBron James is out there vocal about it. Steph Curry's out there vocal about it. And there's a slew of other folks who would normally sort of like fly under the radar, who are seeing what Kaepernick is doing and deciding like we need to stand with him. So I think in many ways, he's another one of our leaders in this moment.
When black players take a knee during the national anthem to protest police violence against African Americans, they are making a gesture of pain and distress. They are putting America in a more honest context. Quote from Kaepernick directly: "There is police brutality. People of color have been targeted by police. So that's a large part of it, and they're government officials. They are put in a place by the government. So that's something that this country has to change. There's things we can do to hold them more accountable, make those standards higher. You have people that practice law and are lawyers and go to school for 8 years, but you can become a cop in 6 months and don't have to have the same amount of training as a cosmetologist. That's insane. Someone that's holding a curling iron has more education and more training than people that have a gun and are going out there on the street to protect us." So, what are your reactions to Colin Kaepernick's comments?
First of all, you took a shot at cosmetologists just now. But I think what Kaepernick is like doing, I think, particularly with the knee, and he was advised to do that, to take that particular stance. I mean, he's trying to force America to be honest and take a look at themselves but particularly around how we've been ignoring the issues with police violence, particularly against African Americans in this country. And truth be told, one of the lesser known facts is that Native people in this country, indigenous folks per capita, are disproportionately killed at the hands of police, disproportionate to their population in this country. So it's a people of color thing in terms of police violence. It's not only African American thing, and Latinos as well. And I think like he's trying to get America to think about this and see it more honest. But even now, and this is the part of it I think, as we're living in this moment of history, it's sort of very sad, is that the conversation is about the anthem and it's about the flag, and it's been taken, and it's been sort of like it's been hijacked away from what it is, that we have racial oppression and racial injustice in this country, and like black people don't feel like this country cares about them, and we got evidence to prove it, right? We got tapes, we got videotapes, we got Rodney King. We can look at, we have evidence about this sort of stuff, and what Kaepernick is doing is asking America to see that in a polite way. Like he ain't kicking down anybody's doors. He's taking a knee. And now other places are doing that same thing, and America hates that. America hates the fact that folks who they are accustomed to telling what to do are now saying that we can do what we want, and we're going to protest any injustices that are coming towards us and the people in our communities. America hates that. I mean, evidence shows that that America hates that sort of reckoning with that with itself.
And so, what are your thoughts around Kaepernick's point that he was making, that in certain parts of this country, it is way easier to become a law enforcement official and given a firearm with all the responsibility that comes with that. And you have other professions, and he mentioned two. One is a lawyer and two is a cosmetologist, but that these folks have more higher standards in terms of the way that they're trained and the education that they receive regarding their profession. So what are your thoughts about his comments that some people are just given a gun in carte blanche?
Well, I mean, it's truth, first of all, right? It's truth, but I think he's just trying to give substance to the fact that we are entrusting people with our lives on the streets, and that we don't see the need for them to have further training. In fact, we're sort of okay with it, and I think that the mere fact that we're okay with it because it's not happening to in mass, it's not happening so blatantly to non-black people, to white folks in this country, that we're okay with this lack of training because it's not affecting people who have the power to change it. But even beyond that, like policing in this country, as I said, for decades, pretty much since the inception of like institutional policing in this country, have been killing people of color, right? This is like part of the culture, the core of it. And I'm not saying that every cop is doing that, but it's part of the culture that people sort of step into. And there's no amount of training. This is sort of not what Catholics saying, just sort of where I'm going at it. But there's no sort of training, I think, that can stop somebody from killing somebody who their training tell them you're not supposed to kill them, right? What's the brother in Staten Island? Eric Garner. They were trained not to do that chokehold, and they did the chokehold, and the officer Pantaleo got away with it. They were trained not to beat Rodney King, not to use those swings. They beat him with those swings, and they got away with it. So training is important. We need more training. They definitely need to pay more attention to like the levels of education some of these folks have. But it's also that you can't police the police from doing what they do when they see me and you on the street corner.
At a campaign rally on September 22nd for Republican Senator Luther Strange, Trump angered many in the NFL by calling for team owners to fire any quote-unquote SOB who quote-unquote disrespects our flag. Furthermore, in tweets, Trump said, great solidarity for the national anthem and for our country. Standing with locked arms is good. Kneeling is not acceptable. Bad ratings. In another tweet, he said, if a player wants the privilege of making millions of dollars in the NFL or other leagues, he or she should not be allowed to disrespect the flag. So not only has Kaepernick taken a stance around police brutality and has been vocal on that, you've also seen other celebrities do the same thing. But now we have the president who is using that protest to shift the attention towards the national anthem specifically and the flag more peripherally. So I would love to hear your thoughts and your analysis on why it is important for us to stay focused on what the true original message was for that protest.
Well, that's the purpose of Trump's statements. The purpose of Trump's statements are to distract and to divert attention to another place. That's his way, that's his strategy, that's what he does. But it's important for us to stay on message because people are dying. I think that's why it's important for us to stay on message. People die. And not only people are physically dying, but people are harassed by police on a daily basis, largely because of what they look like. And any one of those moments can lead to another tragic moment that results in a hashtag. Any one of those moments. But beyond that, there's a level of trauma of police in this country that is felt by people of color. As young as kids in primary school, elementary school, that believe and feel that they're not supposed to trust the police, And when you have that sort of feel from young people, it creates an alienation they develop a further alienation as they get older. But that's not what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Trump doesn't care about that. And his surrogates and many of his supporters either don't care, I believe many of them don't care, and others just are unable to see the impact of police violence on communities of color.
And so Trump's tweets, there have been folks who support him, who are his surrogates, who have said things like, well, the president is utilizing his First Amendment right, the right to free speech, and he's vocalizing that, moving away from mainstream media, using Twitter specifically. But why is it, in your analysis and in your interpretation, that same critique is not given to folks like Kaepernick and other people who have protested about state-sanctioned violence? Because
that's America. That's the American way. I think the ability to ignore racism and white supremacy is like an American product. And so what Trump does through his tweets and his public comments, calling people SOBs, knowing that that's a dog whistle, and knowing that the majority of players in the league are black folks, knowing that Kaepernick's a black person, knowing that the people that he's attacked who have protested are black, whether it be Jamil Hill, Steph Curry, LeBron James. Like, he's attacked black folks, and it's not only black folks that have been criticizing him, there have been white folks who have been criticizing him too. But he's been able to focus in on black folks, and I think that speaks to they vote 62 or 69 people, about 62 million people, I believe, voted for him, right? And many of these people were able to ignore his sexism, his xenophobia, his immaturity, his inability to really speak to the issues, because he resonated. He tapped into something. Everybody is saying that, but he's tapped into something. They've been able to ignore all the things that they wouldn't want their own child doing or their own partner saying to them, and still voted for this person. I mean, that's literally how slavery lasted so long, because people were able to ignore their own personal values, but understood that, like, to be able to align themselves with the values of somebody who fits their pockets, and ignore the fact that this person is also causing harm to many people. That's like what white supremacy looks like. That's what systemic oppression looks like, and we're living in the moment now.
Yeah. Do you think protesting the NFL is an appropriate step?
Hell yeah. I'm happy that folks in the NFL have done that, and I hope folks in the NBA do it. These folks have platforms. And for what it's worth, we always criticize athletes for you need to be a role model. You need to care about these issues. You need to take a stand. You're more than just a player. Now that they do, folks are saying, this is not the place to do it. I mean, to like summon in like Martin Luther King, like, when is the right time to do it? Like, when is the right time to protest? We need to stop killing people. We need to wait until the anthem is done and say, well, now's the time to talk about that. I think it's absurd, but it also speaks once again to, like, this is us. This is a country that we live in that can sort of minimize the value of certain lives.
And so I would love to hear what your thoughts are about Jamil Hill and, her being an ESPN anchor and utilizing her platform to call Trump out for what she believed him to be, which many people believe him to be, which is a white supremacist, in the fact that he supported white supremacy. What do you think of people like her who are not necessarily athletes, but also, as you said, utilizing their weight, so to speak, in society, particularly on social media, to weigh in on these conversations?
Well, first of all, I want to know where Melania Trump is at, because she's supposed to have this whole cyberbullying thing going. I don't know where she at with this. But I think there's two things about that. Those in the social justice field use big terms like patriarchy, and we use white supremacy a lot. And I think we are seeing that on display right there. When you see with ESPN, there are other analysts, anchors, Stephen A. Smith, but particularly Max Kellerman, and Skip Bayless, two white anchors who have been very vocal in their critique of number 45 of Trump. And not once has he mentioned them. But when he had this one black woman who one time tweets, right, she didn't say it on air, when she tweets about one calling a white supremacist, and then the next time tweets about the way to really get at NFL owners is to get at to go after their advertisers. She tweets that, and ESPN says we now need to censor her. We need to suspend her. It's something to be said about his like this is who he is. When his campaign, we saw some of his sexism come out, and the way how he feels towards women, how he treats women. and definitely how he speaks to people who are people of color. When you think about the judge who said wasn't fit because he was Latino. This is who he is. You understand what I'm saying? So now that Jamil Hill has used Twitter, the same platform that he uses to come at people, that he used to come at Steph Curry and so many other players, she is voicing her own voice on Twitter. Now, ESPN is saying that she violated a social media policy, but I call BS on that. And the reason why, because literally, when she made the first comment, he said she should be fired. And now 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, in the stream of time, she's now suspended. So you're gonna tell me there's no connection there, that folks aren't, I mean, that's what's systemic. Like if we were in a history class right now, and I wish I was a history teacher at this moment, like there's so many history lessons happening right now. There's so many ways to break down these big terms that we use, heteropatriarchy and white supremacy. We can like give real life examples now. We can say just follow Donald Trump's Twitter and you'll find it all right there.
So Marlon, tell us and the listeners and the viewers more about your work that you're doing specifically to address police accountability, gun violence, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think, for those of us who, former incarcerated folks, it's important for us to see the intersection between like the justice system, criminal justice system, and larger issues of social justice. And I see like the criminal justice system is the umbrella under like social justice issues. So to answer your question, I'm somebody who's been a gun violence prevention advocate on various levels over the last almost 8 years now since I've been home, from a violence interrupter to creating programming to train young people to be community organized against gun violence, to being.
And do you want to say what a violence interrupter is?
Yeah, so violence interrupter is based off of a model out of Chicago called Cure Violence, whereas that you have people who are considered credible messages, people who are of the community, people who have an understanding of like how the community works, who might have been in the streets themselves, did time, that's me, and now are interacting in the community with people who are highest risk to engage in gun violence, to prevent them from shooting their guns, right? So I was trained, I was able to do that. And just a couple months after I came home, and it progressed on to now on a policy level around gun control, et cetera. But I've start focused now not only on like gun violence, preventing gun violence, but understand that there's a connection between the type of violence that we as people of color perform on each other and the type of violence that's perpetrated upon us from law enforcement. I believe that they model a certain type of violence and a certain type of harm that we now sort of internalize and push towards each other. So the work I've been doing is sort of like looking at ways to reduce gun violence and police violence at the same time. I don't believe in good faith that we can only talk about stopping each other from shooting and not address the fact that police are like putting people in a certain frame of mind of hypervigilance, but also modeling for us the type of violence that we model towards each other.
And so we have about a minute or so left. Do you want to say a little bit more about the Decarcerated Podcast?
Yeah, you are a guest on that. Decarcerated Podcast, yeah, check it out. It's everywhere you can find it on iTunes, SoundCloud, etc. The Decarcerated Podcast highlights the journeys of success of people who spend time in jails and prisons. I firmly believe, as you have this media platform, that we're, as formerly incarcerated folks, there are many parts of our stories, and there's many parts of our journeys, and they aren't all dark. But even through that darkness is light. And I believe that we are not only should be people who are on shows and speak and being interviewed, but we should create these platforms. So the podcast is a platform where that as a formerly incarcerated person, I get to speak with other folks who are formerly incarcerated about their journeys of success. And you've been a guest, and you had a lot of great people on the show. And this is our second season in motion now. And a new episode comes out every Friday, so you can download the podcast on.
And how can folks listen, learn more about the Decarcerated Podcast, about your work? Where can they go to learn more?
So you go to my website, marlonpeterson.com. You can find all the episodes there. You can find out more about my work as well as my writing, which I take a lot of pride in. The podcast is available everywhere you can download podcasts: iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, anywhere you can find it.
Well, thank you, Marlon, for being our guest. And thank you for the important work that you do each day. And thank you for standing with us in solidarity as we support the NFL players, Jamil Hill and other celebrities who are dedicated to the original cause of ending police brutality and creating accountability. And thank you, the viewers, for joining us on Manhattan Neighborhood Network and in TV Land as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org or on Facebook by typing in The Fortune Society. This is Khalil Cumberbatch as we critically look at both sides of the bars.